Okay, so the plan today is to install a new Woodcraft case cover for over here on the stator side of the motorcycle. As you can see, this one's already taken a little bit of damage, that's why we're replacing it. It used to have a GB case cover on there, but that took a few different crashes. This factory case is actually a pretty nice piece. It's actually made of magnesium, which is really nice. But since it's taken some damage, I would have had to replace the entire case cover as well as buy a new GB case cover. What I did instead is bought this from Woodcraft. And so this piece will go on here, replacing the entire factory piece. And it has a small skid plate that we'll install and put that whole thing together. And then if or when there's another crash, all you have to do is replace this skid plate. You're good to go, back in action. I've already popped most of the bolts out of here because I've looked at this before. And what I like to do when I'm doing these kind of jobs is take a new piece, put it on a piece of scrap cardboard that you've got, make a tracing, and then you can take and put the bolts that you're pulling out in each of the holes that correspond to the piece. That way, because these bolts are of different lengths with the GB case covers, you don't get anything mixed up. So all the bolts holding this piece in place are 8mm bolts, and I'm using my Motion Pro combo tool. I'll put a link in the description to help pull all these off. This is really nice because it's got 8, 10, and 12 all built into the same tool. So it's got most of the bolts you're going to need for most minor maintenance on the bike. So I'm going to go ahead, move my new part out of the way, take care of my old part, and I'll take off my last 2 bolts. So all the bolts are out. Woodcraft includes all the bolts you're going to need for the new kit. Next thing we do, we take this case cover off, and this is going to actually be held in place by the magnets because underneath here is a stator. That's the thing that charges your motorcycle. So you're going to have a stator under here, there's magnets. It's going to feel like it's a little bit difficult to pull off, but if you just go ahead and grab it and wiggle a little bit, pull it out, and you can see there's the inside of your stator. Now if this is the first time you were pulling it off, you would have seen there was a gasket on here. I've already pulled that out, so we don't have the gasket. Now looking inside, what we've got is the stator itself, held in by Torx bits, and the charging unit that actually goes with the motorcycle, held in by hex bits. And so I have my hex bits here. Looks like we've got the charger in are some 4mm bits. The charger electronics. Go ahead and loosen those up. Aside, and then that'll pull right out. We've got the one more right there, which looks like it's a 5. You've got a bracket, set that down, and now this comes out, and the only thing left is the actual stator itself. Now, one thing that maybe I could have done, yeah, looking at that, looks like I can just release a few clips there. So we'll actually hold this stuff back in place. The magnet, hold this on for a second. So we have a connector right up here. Push in and disconnect. Same thing on the small one, push tab. Now we can take the entire piece right off the motorcycle. Got our bracket, put that down here. And now we need some Torx bits to remove the stator itself. So the install of these screws calls for permanent Loctite. That's your red Loctite. And that's for obvious reason, right? This case cover is going to be sitting over here, over top of your rotor with the stator in there. And if one of these screws were to back themselves out, well, this thing's spinning at really high speeds, and what you're going to have is that screw is going to end up in your motor, and it's going to really cause some stuff that you don't want to have happen. So another benefit of choosing the stainless steel plate over one of the aluminum plates, I think, is in the case that you actually did lose one of those screws. I'm going to try to fit this here for you. You're going to be able to see all these screws since you can see the holes already in the plate. So if you lose one of those screws, you're going to be able to look at the side of the bike and you're going to be able to see that instantly. With the aluminum covers, it's a solid piece right there, so you're not going to be able to see it. But a real good way, good cheap insurance to make sure that you don't lose any of those screws is just use the permanent Loctite that they call for. So we're going to do that next for our install. Each of these screws here has a 3mm hex head. So we've got our 3mm T-handle. We got our case cover. We're going to take this, and if you look at it with the stainless steel, because there are holes on both sides, you want to make sure that the chamfered side, this side here, is facing out. So chamfered side goes out. Flip this case cover over. So we take our red permanent Loctite, put a little bit here on the threads. So one of the interesting things about Loctite that I didn't realize, watched a cool video the other day, I'll try and find a link in the description, is that Loctite works when it's completely, when all the air has been removed. So right now, sometimes you'll buy a part and it'll have Loctite on there and you think, oh, well, this stuff's already cured. The Loctite only cures when the oxygen's pushed away, and the oxygen gets pushed away when you take this, insert it in the cover and screw it down. Then you picture those threads, they tie together, pushes all the air out, and then it cures. So that's why you can get manufacturers that ship stuff with Loctite pre-installed. So for us, it's in the liquid form for now. I'm going to go ahead and just drop this in there, tighten by hand. And snug it down a little bit, not all the way yet, because there is a little bit of play in the alignment there. Just enough to make sure that that thing's holding in place. Grab my next screw. You might look at this too and think, how is this screw going to stop oil from leaking out? Because there is oil in here. Well, if you take a close look, we've actually got a nice little rubber gasket on there that Woodcraft supplied. So that rubber gasket is going to be what keeps all the oil inside the motor where it belongs. We do not supply a torque spec in here, but one of the nice things about working on this stuff is that typically the tool will kind of tell you what torque you should be at if you don't have an actual torque number. So there is the old German torque spec of Gutentight, which is always a good measure, but you don't want to go too hard. You are screwing into stainless steel and not into aluminum like you would be with some of the cover plates. So aluminum strips a little bit easier than stainless steel does, but because these are only 3mm hex, you're only going to be able to put so much torque on them. And you kind of, when you have a T-handle like this, you can actually feel that handle flex a little bit, the metal of the Allen key. So you say, okay, I'm pretty good. And now I'm going to show you what I was talking about. Because I bought the stainless steel version, you can see each of these heads popping through. And that's a really good indication when you get back in the pits. Just take a glance down there, you'll be able to see it right away. A nice shiny stainless steel. If there was any black holes in there, you'd know you'd lost a screw. And hopefully at that point you could stop, check things, and it hadn't worked its way into where it would do some serious damage. But the red Loctite should make sure that none of that ever happens. Okay, so now that we've got all of that taken care of, everything loosened, everything off, the next step that we're going to do, put the skid plate on. You can see the skid plate bolts are in there, is we're actually going to take and we're going to transfer this stator and the pickup over to the new component. So one thing that's always a good idea is just take a blue shop towel, go through here, pull out any dust. You know, this isn't inside your cylinders or anything, but it's still something that you want to keep very clean because it will be inside your motor. It's going to be rotating at a very high speed. So we get that all nice and cleaned out. And then we're just going to take and pull our stator out of the old piece, line it up by hand, place it in the new piece, and then we're going to follow the same procedure. So we've got our old bolts here, and you can actually see they've got a little bit of thread locker on there from the original installation in the factory. Same procedure, we're going to put some red permanent thread lock on there because the same way we did with the cover bolts, we don't want these bolts falling out and causing us any problems inside of our motor. So we take the red thread lock, just get a little bit on there. Put that in place by hand, just part way through. Take our red thread lock. Is it 4mm? So we'll take and tighten it down. This time, keep in mind we are threading into aluminum. This cover, the new Woodcraft cover, is made of aluminum. So we want to make sure that we don't over tighten, because aluminum is soft and we definitely don't want to strip those threads out. So just kind of get it, again, that German spec of guten tight. I don't want to go quite so tight. The thread locker is going to do its job, so just get it in there, get it hand tight. You don't want it loose, you want it snug up against the surface, but you don't want to go so much that you actually end up rotating out of there. So then we also have our bracket, and what this thing does is that's going to hold our cable in place and out of the way. And so we're going to line that up, do a little test fit, and here I want you to make sure you get this detail. So we have our stator wiring there and our sensor wiring here, and you want this top little bit to go over top of the sensor wire and this bottom bit to go over top of the stator wire. So we take and put that in there. Grab our old bolt, make sure that it's nice and clean. Take our permanent thread lock. And this one is going to be a 5mm, it's a different size than the sensor holder. Put that in place. That's the other reason I like these T-handle sets, so I'm not constantly switching it in and out off my ratchet. So we do have these torch bolts. Same thing with those. We're going to want to apply a little bit of permanent thread locker to the bottom threads, where it's going to be engaging with the cover itself, making sure that it's clean. Just go ahead and put each of these in loosely by hand. And just tighten these down. It's important with pretty much anything that you're tightening down that you don't tighten down one bolt all the way at first, because what that's going to do is it's going to put uneven pressure on the piece that you're tightening. So if you tighten one bolt down all the way, you can kind of picture that's going to tip up the other side of whatever the piece is you're tightening down. It's going to put it at a bit of an angle, and then when you go to tighten the other pieces down, everything's going to be a little bit misaligned, and you risk just scraping a little bit on the piece and just having not a nice, even, flat surface. So you kind of just want to get to the point where it's just barely touching. And then go around the piece. And again, just kind of make sure that it's in there, but you don't have to use gorilla strength. You can see that I'm holding the tool like this. I'm not using the full lever of the tool. This is a 3/8 inch ratchet. And the reason I'm doing that is because that kind of limits the amount of torque that I'm going to be putting on this and makes it a little bit less likely that I'm going to actually strip this out. And we can check and make sure that if there's a torque spec for this and get it torqued down to the proper spec. If there is, I'll put it in the video description and right there. Okay, so now we have the new piece. We're almost ready to go. We're almost ready to put it on the bike. But one thing you'll know with this, since this surface in here, there is going to be oil moving around, Woodcraft has supplied us with a gasket. And so this gasket's going to go on, But in order to put on the gasket, we're going to need to actually clean and remove the old gasket material. But knowing you, if you guys are anything like me, these projects, sometimes you start them and you get called off and have to do something else, which I just did. So what we're going to do in the meantime, we still have some gasket material on here, so we're going to take this piece and we're just going to set it over top, and the force of magnetism is going to hold this thing in place while we go off, take a pause on our project and come back. Two things that you're going to note with the old cover: we have these dowel pins, and the locations on the old one and the new one are the same. And these are just kind of locator pins. They work along with the screws to help hold everything just perfectly and precisely in place. So you take the two of those, slide them in place. We're just going to take this cover. The magnet's going to pull on it as you're going. We'll get it lined up by hand. And then we'll leave this here for now.